Some women stay silent until silence becomes their sharpest weapon. But Elena's silence wasn't born of shyness, it was born of calculation. She knew every word she spoke in this foreign city carried the weight of her accent, each syllable exposing her as not one of them. And he, Daniel, her husband of 7 years, loved to remind her of it, sometimes with a smirk over dinner, sometimes in front of friends, sometimes in front of strangers. The way his voice would twist her vowels into a caricature, his friends chuckling politely while her chest burned. The first time he mocked her, she thought it was a joke. The third time, she thought it was a habit. By the 10th, she knew it was a strategy, a subtle dismantling of her dignity, brick by brick. You know that kind of cruelty, don't you? The one wrapped in the thin paper of humor so you're not allowed to call it what it is. Daniel wasn't always like this. Or maybe he was, and she just couldn't see it when she was 24, fresh off the plane, with her dreams folded neatly in the suitcase he carried for her. He had money then, and she had hope. But money thinned and hope grew heavy. And somewhere along the way, he learned that cutting her down cost him nothing and made him feel taller. Elena tried to shrink herself in response. She cooked better dressed, better learned more. She swallowed the corrections that rose in her throat when he exaggerated her mistakes. But you can only swallow so much before you start choking. One night at a dinner party with his colleagues, he imitated her ordering coffee the funny way she pronounced the word cappuccino. His audience roared. Elena smiled politely because that's what women are trained to do when humiliated in public. But inside, a shadow uncoiled. She noticed his boss's wife glance at her not with pity but with something sharper, recognition. Later in the kitchen, as she helped clear the dishes, the woman whispered, "They only mock what they fear." That sentence sat with Elena like a secret seed. She watered it in silence. You ever notice how the people who try to make you small are terrified you might grow? Daniel didn't know she'd been working quietly for the past 2 years, translating financial documents online, building a client base overseas. She never spoke of it, not because she feared him, but because she understood the value of surprise. He thought her funny English was all she had. He didn't know she had learned another language entirely, the one written in numbers, profit margins, and wire transfers. It was during a rainy Tuesday morning over burnt toast and the stench of his cigarette that he dropped his latest jab. "You should let me handle the bills, Elena. Numbers might be tricky for you." His voice dripped with that syrupy cruelty only long-term abusers perfect. She didn't even look up. "I'm fine with numbers," she said, buttering her toast. What she didn't say was that she had been running numbers bigger than anything he'd ever touched, that she had accounts he didn't know existed, that the bank called her Madam in a tone they reserved for their most valuable clients. That Friday, the news broke a foreign real estate deal she had been involved in closed at triple its projected profit. Her name, her accent, her photograph splashed across business news sites. She didn't send him the links. She didn't have to. His phone buzzed all night with messages from people congratulating her, not them, her. When he finally brought it up, his tone was careful, like a man tiptoeing through broken glass. "You never told me you were doing all this." She smiled. "You never asked." It wasn't anger in her voice. It was something worse for him, indifference. "And you know the cruelest thing you can give a man who lives off your reactions? Nothing." That week, she moved the rest of her earnings into an account solely under her name. She didn't announce it. She didn't make a scene. The quiet mother archetype, the golden daughter, the underestimated wife, she had played them all. Now she was stepping into something else entirely. But she didn't stop speaking with her accent. Why would she? It was the sound of 2 worlds inside her, the one that raised her and the one she conquered. The difference was now, when Daniel heard it, he didn't laugh. He listened. And beneath his listening, there was something new. Fear. Daniel began to orbit her like a man who'd realized the sun wasn't where he'd left it. He started fetching her tea in the mornings, chamomile with honey, as if sweetness could erase the years he'd salted her wounds. He lingered at the doorway when she took calls in crisp, precise business English, the kind she'd trained herself to speak when commas had 7 zeros after them. The kitchen filled with the quiet clink of teaspoons and the louder silence of a man strategizing his apology. He suggested date nights, suddenly remembered anniversaries, bought her a scarf, the color of apology roses. He laughed softer at the things he used to laugh at harder. He didn't make the jokes anymore about cappuccino. He learned to say it correctly, his mouth heavy with the new weight of respect he hadn't earned. "You know that performance, don't you? When contrition arrives late and in costume, flowers in hand, a script he memorized 5 minutes before curtain. Do you forgive because you're tired, or do you watch because you've finally woken up?" Then came his mother, Maritza. Tight bun, tighter mouth, the kind of woman whose eyebrows were small knives. She arrived with a suitcase that thudded against the hallway tile like a verdict. "Just until I get my hips sorted," she said, as if she were asking permission, while already hanging her coat in their closet. Elena smiled, set out fresh towels, made soup. The quiet mother archetype at the door, the warrior beneath the apron. Maritza's eyes dragged over Elena's clothes, the photographs, the framed article on the wall featuring Elena's deal. "Nice article," she said, voice brittle as ice on a puddle. "They must be very generous with compliments these days." Elena only nodded. She had learned that not every provocation deserved a witness. "But you would have answered, wouldn't you? You would have burned the kitchen down with a single sentence, then thirsted all night." Elena had no such thirst left. She drank water, she breathed, she watched. At dinner, Maritza told stories about Daniel's childhood genius. The lemonade stand, the chess trophies, the boys who followed him. "He's always been the leader," she said, like a priest polishing a relic. Daniel smiled at his plate. Elena noticed the way his jaw worked when his mother spoke for him. There it was, the original audience, the first applause he ever craved. Days folded into each other. In the mornings, Maritza's commentary ran like a news ticker. "In our country, daughters know how to keep a home. In our family, we speak properly. In our house, we don't plaster money on the walls." Elena stirred coffee and said nothing. But silence isn't surrender. It's a test. How long can someone talk before they reveal what they're protecting? One afternoon, Elena found Maritza in the study, riffling through folders. Looking for a pen, the older woman said too quickly, fingers skimming over the ledger Elena kept for the building syndicate she'd quietly joined. Names. Numbers, the slow, patient accumulation of power that didn't announce itself at parties. That night, Daniel suggested they simplify finances. "We should consolidate, babe," he said lightly. "You know joint accounts. I can help manage. It's confusing with all the wires, the taxes. Wouldn't it be easier if I took care of it?" Elena regarded him like a painting she'd seen before and never liked. "Easier for whom?" He laughed. "For us." That word used to dissolve her. Now it sounded like a sales pitch for a product she didn't need. You've felt that shift, haven't you? That moment when we stops feeling like a home and starts feeling like a trap? You don't slam the door, you just stop walking toward it. She began leaving early to meet a lawyer, not for divorce, not yet, but for structure. A trust with her niece as beneficiary. A foundation clause that would make it difficult for anyone to move her money without her signature. New banking protocols, not dramatic, just thorough. She bought a modest 2-bedroom under a corporate entity. She signed nothing with Daniel in the room. Every step was small and clean. Revenge is a soap opera. Protection is bookkeeping. On Sundays, the house smelled like roasting chicken and old grudges. Daniel would pour wine for his mother and ask Elena about her week with performative curiosity. "And how are your numbers?" he'd say, as if the word were an exotic fruit. "They're obedient," she'd say, and watch him flinch. She noticed his phone lighting up later at night. The screen faced down, a habit learned from guilt. He showered longer, came to bed smelling like hotel soap on days he'd sworn he worked from home. The shadow wife entered the room, then not a woman but an idea, the phantom partner he held in his head, the one who adored his English, his jokes, his certainty. Elena didn't hunt for the shadow. She turned on her side and slept. You would have peered through the light under the bathroom door, wouldn't you? Scrolled screenshot bled. Elena let the shadow parade alone. Shadows die in daylight. At a colleague's barbecue, Daniel slipped. He put on his old mask and tried a small joke about her adorable mispronunciations, but it landed with a dull thud. People had read about her by then. One woman, the boss's wife, again said, "I like her accent. It sounds like decisions." Daniel's smile cracked like a thin sheet of glass. Later he cornered Elena by the hydrangeas. "You could help me, you know. Introductions. Your contacts. My startup needs a bridge." Ah, there it was. The true language he hoped she'd speak. He wanted her capital, her credibility, the key to rooms he could no longer pretend he owned. She tilted her head. "Send the deck," she said calmly. "I'll have someone review it. Not, I will review it, not we, someone." She watched comprehension flicker in his eyes, the realization that she had a world with doors he didn't hold open. Back home, while Maritza slept and the dishwasher hummed, Elena opened a file and examined a list of distressed assets her syndicate was considering. Near the bottom, a familiar address blinked. The small warehouse Daniel's uncle used as collateral, a loan spiraling into default. Interest stacked like chairs in a hall after a wedding. She stared at the screen a long time, then closed it. Sometimes power is knowing you could pull a lever and choosing to wait. Sometimes power is patience sharpened to a point. You understand that, don't you? The sweetness of delayed gravity. In the dark, Daniel turned and murmured, "You still love me," a boy's question in a man's mouth. Elena watched the ceiling. Love, she thought, was a language. Money was a translation. Respect was the only dialect that mattered. The days began to feel like a chess game played under candlelight, every move quiet, deliberate, yet humming with tension. Daniel hovered around her more now, like a satellite desperate to prove it was still relevant to the planet it once thought it owned. He started asking questions about her work as though curiosity could disguise hunger. "So, these partners of yours, they trust you completely." His voice was light, but the words had a pulse. "Yes," she replied without looking up from her laptop. "Completely." He lingered, waiting for more. When she offered none, he wandered off the sound of his footsteps carrying a note. She recognized frustration brushed with fear. "You've seen that, haven't you? When someone realizes they no longer hold the password to your world, they start knocking on doors they once walked through without permission." Maritza's presence in the house deepened the cracks. She made comments when she thought Elena couldn't hear. "She's clever, but clever women are dangerous. They don't know how to love properly." The older woman didn't understand that Elena had long stopped trying to prove her love through servitude. Once, she would have bent herself into shapes for Daniel's approval. Now she poured her energy into the precision of her investments, the cold elegance of her growing empire. It was during a late afternoon storm that the shift became visible. Daniel was pacing in the living room, phone in hand, voice tense. A deal had gone bad. One of his old college friends had roped him into a can't-miss opportunity, and now the money was gone. Elena sat at the dining table, her pen scratching against paper, the rhythm unbroken. He hung up and turned to her. "I just need a little help to get back on my feet. Alone, temporary." Elena didn't even raise her head. "How much?" His answer came too fast. 50,000. "Yes, just to tide me over. I'll pay you back as soon as—" She held up a hand, silencing him mid-promise. "Daniel, if you were a stranger, my due diligence would have already said no." The silence after that was sharp enough to cut. He stared at her, disbelief settling into his features like dust. "You know that look, don't you? The one that says you're not supposed to say no to me? The entitlement of someone who's lived too long on the interest of your goodwill." That night he tried another tactic. He spoke softly in bed, his arm draped over her waist, his breath warm against her neck. "Remember when we first met? You were so shy. I loved that about you. You needed me." Elena's lips curved, not in fondness, but in something colder. "You mistake needing for not yet having." His arm stiffened, then slid away. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's startup began to crumble. Investors backed out, deadlines passed without results. His phone stopped lighting up with opportunity and started lighting up with polite rejections. The shadow wife in his head must have been whispering, then urging him to reclaim something from Elena, to pull her back into the gravity of his need. One evening, he presented her with a business proposal, not printed neatly but scribbled on paper, as if speed could replace substance. "We could do this together," he insisted. "Your contact's my vision, equal partners." Elena read it once, folded it, and placed it on the table. "If you want to do business with me," she said, "send it to my assistant." He laughed in disbelief. "Your assistant? We live together." "That's personal. This is professional." And there it was, the wall he couldn't climb. Not because it was too high, but because it wasn't built for him. But the moment that cemented the change came quietly. A charity gala, warm lights, champagne. Elena arrived alone, her gown the color of deep ocean, her presence commanding in a way no accent could diminish. Across the room, she spotted Daniel, invited by a mutual acquaintance, standing with a small cluster of men. He was watching her, eyes narrowing, when a prominent investor leaned close to speak with her, his hand briefly touching hers in greeting. Daniel approached later, trying to sound casual. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "You didn't ask?" She said again the same words she'd used the night he learned of her success. The investor joined them, praising Elena's recent acquisition. Daniel smiled too wide, inserting himself into the conversation. "We're a great team," he said. Elena's gaze didn't waver from the investor. "Actually," she corrected gently, "this one was mine." The man's eyes flickered between them, reading the subtext instantly. The conversation moved on, but Daniel's face stayed taut. "You've felt that sting, haven't you? The one that comes when someone rewrites the story you've been telling about yourself, and they use the truth as their ink." Back home he was quiet, too quiet, until finally, "You've changed." "No," she said, meeting his gaze. "I've stopped pretending." Outside, the rain began to fall again, steady, measured, unstoppable. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It became a kind of soundtrack to the quiet war playing out between them, steady, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Daniel moved around the house like a man displaced in his own skin, careful not to provoke, but unable to hide the flicker of resentment that passed over his face when Elena's phone rang and she excused herself to take the call in her office. Maritza noticed too. "You keep her busy with all that work," she said to her son one evening, ladling soup into bowls. "A husband should provide enough so his wife can rest." Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't tell his mother that Elena's work wasn't a hobby to fill idle afternoons. It was the spine of the household now. That the accounts carrying her name had more life than his fading ventures. That the people who called her didn't ask for Mrs. Daniel, they asked for Elena. By the fourth day of rain, something broke. It was late past midnight, the house smelling faintly of damp wool and the rosemary she'd hung to dry. Daniel appeared in the doorway of her office, a shadow with a tight jaw. "We can't keep going like this," he said. She closed her laptop. "Like what?" "This coldness, distance, it's not us." Her fingers traced the edge of the desk. "It's exactly us. You just don't like that I stopped performing warmth for you." He flinched, the truth landing harder than any accusation. "You think you're better than me now." Her voice was calm, almost clinical. "I think I finally see the difference between us." He came closer, hands flexing at his sides. "Do you even love me anymore?" And there it was, the question of a man who had mistaken ownership for intimacy. She met his eyes. "Love isn't the issue. Respect is. And you spent years spending mine like it was spare change." "You've been there, haven't you?" The moment when the currency of a relationship runs out and the one who's been overdrawing finally checks the balance. The next morning, Elena left early, not for work, for a meeting with her syndicate partners in a polished high-rise overlooking the city. They discussed acquisitions assets and the pending foreclosure on a small warehouse, the same one Daniel's uncle had leveraged badly. It was a quiet, almost forgettable line item in the ledger, but Elena didn't forget. "Do we proceed?" her partner asked. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. "Yes, proceed." No drama, no explanation, just the gentle click of a pen on paper sealing the fate of something tied to Daniel's family name. That evening, Daniel was waiting for her in the kitchen. "I talked to my uncle today," he said slowly. "He's in trouble. Lost the warehouse. Some group bought it up for pennies." Her expression didn't shift. "That's unfortunate." His eyes narrowed. "Do you know anything about it?" She tilted her head, a faint smile ghosting her lips. "Daniel, not everything is about you. But you and I know better, don't we? We know there are moments when the line between coincidence and intention blurs so beautifully you almost want to believe in fate." Over the next few weeks, Daniel's calls for help became less about business and more about himself. He spoke of feeling invisible, unwanted, left behind. Elena listened, her responses minimal. Her focus elsewhere: meetings, contracts, the slow construction of a life that didn't revolve around soothing his ego. One night he reached for her in bed, not with hunger but with desperation. His hand on her arm, his breath shallow. "Don't leave me." She turned to face him fully, the lamplight casting sharp angles on her features. "Daniel, I already did. You just didn't notice because I was still here." The silence that followed was not the silence of a fight. It was the silence of an ending. 2 weeks later, Elena attended another gala, this time invited as the keynote speaker. She stood before a room of investors, her accent weaving through the air like silk, every word measured, deliberate, unashamed. She spoke not about money, but about the dignity of building something no one could take from you. About how the language of power wasn't in how you pronounced it, but in who listened when you spoke. From the stage, she saw Daniel in the back of the room, standing small in the shadow of men who now turned toward her. Their eyes didn't leave her until she left the stage. And in that moment, she understood something crystal clear: power wasn't in what you took from someone. It was in what you no longer needed from them. Daniel didn't approach her after the gala. He lingered by the exit, hands in his pockets, his gaze restless as people surrounded her, shook her hand, pressed business cards into her palm. It must have been a strange mirror for him, the man who once translated the city for her, now invisible in a crowd that only spoke her name. By the time she walked out into the cool night air, he was leaning against a pillar cigarette, glowing faintly. "You were impressive," he said, his voice careful, as if testing each word for landmines. She smiled faintly. "I know." Something in him bristled. "You could have mentioned I'd be here alone. People kept asking me what I'd do. I didn't know what to say." "That's not my problem to solve," she replied, stepping past him toward the waiting car. And that was the truth, wasn't it? The problem of a man who had tied his identity to hers without ever offering her the same rope. The ride home was silent. Back at the house, Maritza was waiting in the living room like a carved statue, her sharp eyes scanning Elena from head to toe. "Nice dress," she said, her tone dripping with that sticky blend of compliment and critique. "It must have cost quite a bit." Elena met her gaze steadily. "It did. I paid for it." For a moment, the older woman's mask cracked. Her son sat down beside her, a quiet unity forming in their shared discomfort. It was almost poetic, the two of them sitting there realizing the foundation of their hierarchy had shifted, and the furniture of their lives no longer faced the same way. That week, Daniel's startup collapsed completely. He tried to soften the blow when he told her. "We just didn't have the runway," he said, as though using business jargon could disguise the truth. It had failed. She nodded once. "Then you'll have more time to think about what's next." "You could help me," he ventured. "Daniel," she said evenly, "I've already helped you. For years. You just didn't see it because it wasn't in the form you wanted." He stared at her like a man realizing the water he'd been swimming in his whole life had always belonged to someone else. Days later, a letter arrived. An official notice from the consortium that had acquired his uncle's warehouse, now slated for redevelopment into luxury lofts. Daniel read it 3 times before setting it down. He didn't ask if she was involved. He didn't have to. Some truths are written without ink. He began spending more time out of the house after that. Late nights with friends that ended with the scent of perfume clinging to his shirt. Elena noticed, but she didn't follow. She didn't accuse. She didn't need to. You understand this, don't you? When the leash has been in your hand long enough, you can drop it and watch the dog keep circling the same pole. Instead, she focused on her work on her niece's education fund, on expanding the trust. The apartment she'd purchased quietly months ago was now furnished ready. She kept the key in her desk drawer, not as an escape plan, she'd already escaped, but as proof that her exits were now hers to decide. One evening, she returned from a trip to find Daniel waiting in the kitchen. His expression was different this time, not angry, not pleading, just hollow. "Are we done?" he asked. Elena set her bag down, removed her coat. "We've been done for a long time, you just didn't notice because I left without moving." He swallowed hard. "So that's it." She looked at him for a long moment. The rain starting again outside like a quiet drumbeat. "Daniel, when you mocked my accent, you thought you were reminding me of where I came from. But you were really reminding me of where I could go." No shouting, no tears, just the truth, clean and final. 2 weeks later, she handed him divorce papers. Maritza left soon after her goodbye, laced with unspoken blame. Elena didn't mind. People will rewrite the story in their heads to protect themselves, let them. Months passed. Elena moved into her apartment, the windows wide and filled with the city's hum. She still spoke with her accent. She still pronounced cappuccino her way. And now, when people heard her speak, they didn't think about the shape of her mouth. They thought about the shape of her empire. The woman who knows her worth doesn't beg, she watches. Then she rises.